Yeah. And let us share the screen where you get this page. So I hope you are able to see my slides. Okay. Just give me a second, please. Yes. Okay. So I will record attendance based on Teams allow. I have been asked to take some random attendances. Okay, I will start marking today and then from tomorrow. Only some random attendances will be counted. Okay.
If you take it in like the beginning of the class, then people who are late will get unmarked.
Yeah, I'll take it somewhere in the middle. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. Let us begin. We have a new topic today. So I'm going to deal with a new topic. Very, no, it's simple and yet very, very useful. And I hope you will find this interesting. And this topic is called context-free grammars. And we are going to deal with a slightly larger class of languages than regular languages. So in the last class, we saw that there were languages which were regular, right? So given by either a finite automata or a regular expression, or if you're even if you're given a collection of words, you can determine whether it's regular or not. And then there are non-regular languages, right? And one typical example was a raised to n, b raised to n, where n is greater than equal to 0. This collection of words we showed was not regular by using pumping lemma as well as using the Myhill-Nerode theorem. So there are non-regular languages, but non-regular languages are also very useful. For defining regular languages, we had automata such as DFA or epsilon NFA or expressions like regular expressions. But when we want to deal with a larger class of languages which are not regular, what can we do? And we deal with one very interesting class of languages, very widely used, called context-free languages. And we will define a kind of mechanism called context-free grammars for defining such languages. Now, you all dealt with English grammar, right, in your school, or Hindi grammar. For natural languages, we are taught grammars. And given a sentence, we have to find out what is its grammatical form, right? Now, this kind of ideas were formalized by Noam Chomsky. The ideas were there in grammar long ago, but he gave us certain formalism to how to build such grammars and what shape those grammars can take. And the kind of grammars that he used are called phrase structured grammars, right? And they were defined by Noam Chomsky way back in 1950, very famous person. He founded the field of computational linguistics, that is processing natural languages using computers, which is today also called NLP, natural language processing. Okay, so this is the idea. And he said that a sentence in a language like English can be defined by a set of rules which look like this. So what do these rules say? A sentence consists of a noun phrase followed by a verb phrase. Okay. And what is a noun phrase? A noun phrase consists of an optional, in bracket we give an optional category. So noun phrase is a syntactic category. Sentence category is made out of noun phrase followed by verb phrase, and noun phrase may optionally contain an adjective phrase followed by a noun. Okay. What is an adjective phrase? An adjective phrase consists of an adjective followed by an optional, subsequent further adjective phrase. So you could have an adjective, 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 such things can be there because, so we'll see how this gives rise to sentences. And a verb phrase consists of a verb followed by what is called an adverb phrase. And an adverb phrase is an adverb followed by an optional adverb phrase. So everything in bracket is optional. Okay. And he said sentences quite a few. This is not the full grammar for English language, but this covers a few English, quite a few English sentences, and it can be used to derive, English sentences, or, English sentences can be fitted into this kind of structure. So now we are only trying to give the grammatical sentence of structure of the sentence. It does not have to have any meaning. Okay, so we are talking about what are grammatically correct sentences. There may be absurd sentences like this, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. This is a sentence which fits into this framework. So let me show you why this fits into this framework. Let me draw it here. So I have a sentence, I'm trying to derive something, a sentence. So it will consist of a noun phrase followed by a verb phrase, right? So my sentence actually consists of noun phrase followed by verb phrase. You can read it at this level. What is a noun phrase? A noun phrase is an adjective phrase, AP, followed by a noun, right? And this adjective phrase can actually consist of an adjective followed by another adjective phrase. In my case, I need to do this because I have an adjective followed by an optional adjective phrase, but I am invoking that adjective phrase too. And here, for this adjective phrase, I am just saying I have an adjective. And what is that adjective? This one is, I will draw it in black, not black, but in blue. And for this adjective, I will use colorless. And this adjective I will choose as green, right? And for this noun, I will choose ideas. And verb phrase similarly can be broken into a verb followed by a adverb phrase. And an adverb phrase can consist of an adverb followed by optional further adverb phrase, but I just use one adverb. And this verb I will choose as what? Sleep, right? Because to sleep is an action and it's a verb, So these are whatever this object of this sleep was, they are doing. And this, how do they sleep? What is the characteristic of this? So I will draw this adverb will be furiously. So is everybody clear about how this sentence is grammatically fits into this structure of sentences defined by this grammar? I'm just giving this intuitively. You can say that, there are various kind of structures which can arise, and my sentence has this structure. This is called, by the way, what we have drawn above is called the parse tree or derivation tree of this sentence. So every sentence under a given grammar will have a parse tree, and that parse tree, makes clear the structure of the sentence. And we have, this is the kind of exercise we were asked to do in school for language sentences, right? We had to identify which was the noun phrase, which was the sequence of adverbs, that is an adverb phrase, things like that, right? So Noam Chomsky said that language can be formalized, the grammatical structure of the language can be formalized by rules like this, right? And this is what he called as phrase structured grammars. Now, this and its elaborations are widely used, in linguistics to define languages and tasks over languages. For example, translating English into German, first you figure out the structure of the English sentence in terms of its parse tree, and then you systematically transform this English parse tree into German parse tree. It's much easier to do at parse tree level rather than at the sentence level. Okay, which is why we go through this. So this was the original idea. In fact, much before Chomsky, this kind of attempt was all done by the famous Sanskrit grammarian Panini. So how many of you have heard of the name Panini? Panini in 5th century AD wrote a grammar for language Sanskrit, and a very precise grammar. In fact, he gave the definitive set of rules which will define Sanskrit sentences. Okay, so here, while English fits some of these grammars only approximately, Panini had a very precise grammar for Sanskrit. So his work predates Chomsky, but Chomsky defined a formal framework of norms such phrase structure grammars which can be used to define very many different languages, whereas Panini was also only concerned with grammar for Sanskrit. Okay, so Chomsky actually founded a method, general method for defining languages, and the method that these methods of course define grammatically correct sentences. You know, a sentence like this has no meaning, but it is grammatically correct, and it is used to formalize natural languages. But there are, since then this method has found used in formalizing lots of artificial languages and their processing. Okay, so it has been found even more useful in defining artificial languages, like, you know, C programs. What is a grammatically correct C program, or what is a grammatically correct HTML page? You know, all this can be defined using these forms of grammars. So here is a grammar which defines very simple form of arithmetic expressions made out of digits and using arithmetic operators plus and star. And I am talking only about fully parenthesized expressions. So expression like this, right? And I'm claiming that any such expression which is fully parenthesized and made out of digits using plus and multiply is generated by rules like this, right? So how would I generate an expression like this? I would say that I would build a parse tree which shows how this is generated. So I would have an expression. Are you able to, anybody can give me an idea how this, which rule should I use at the top? This expression is made out of, you know, by using this, in some sense, this plus operator applied to sub expressions. Do you see the recursive structure of this expression? This bigger expression is made out of taking plus of two sub expressions. So I'm going to have a string which looks like left bracket and then a sub expression. So this is a bracket. Sorry, it looks like C, but this is a bracket. Then I have got symbol plus. Let me just put them in quotes to see that these are actual symbols from the alphabet. And then whereas things like E are, you know, syntactic categories. They are not symbols from the alphabet. So I have here a string which consists of a sequence of, you know, what are some symbols from my alphabet and some syntactic categories. So basically I'm saying my structure of my expression at the top level is a plus symbol preceded by, you know, having a left expression and a right expression enclosed in brackets. That is what I'm saying. And this expression is actually just a digit. And which digit is it? It is 3. On the other hand, this right hand side expression is further made out of left bracket and an expression and then a multiply character or multiply symbol followed by another expression and then a right bracket. So are you able to see what I'm writing? Anybody has any problem? And then this expression reduces to 2 and this expression reduces to 4. So at the bottom of this tree, you know, at the bottom of this tree, we have a sequence of symbols from the alphabet, you know, which is digits, left brackets, plus, multiply. Inside the tree, we have these syntactic categories corresponding to what is the kind of sub-expression we have got. Here we have only got one type called expression. But in case of languages, we had things like noun phrases and verb phrases. So if we look at verb phrase and the subtree under it, it gives us this thing at the bottom. This is called the yield of the tree. The bottommost sequence of symbols that you get in the tree gives you the yield of the tree. And the yield of this verb phrase subtree is sleeps furiously. So sleeps furiously matches this verb phrase. Similarly, the yield of this noun phrase is colorless green ideas, right? So the structure is clear to you. And here we get basically this string. So rules like this are called context-free grammars. And they consist of some syntactic categories like E in this case, expressions, or in case of English grammar, categories like S standing for sentences, NP standing for noun phrase, VP standing for verb phrase, AP standing for adjective phrase, ADVP standing for adverb phrase, etc. Right? So we have some syntactic categories, and then we have got symbols of the alphabet like this left bracket, plus, star, right bracket, 3, 2 digits, you know, things like that. So we have symbols of the alphabet. They are called terminals. Syntactic categories are called non-terminals. So you should just remember the terminology. Okay. Non-terminals are things like E or verb phrase or noun phrase. Terminals are symbols like plus, star, multiply. And our final word or the sentence that we are trying to recognize will be made of terminals. And it has to be generated using this grammar. Okay. And then we have got derivation rules or production. So each of these is called a production or a derivation rule, right? So here we have 3 productions. Clear? The structure of the grammar is clear. And finally, there can be many non-terminal symbols in my grammar, S, NP, AP, VP, ADVP, but one of them is chosen as the start symbol. So S is the start symbol, which means our derivation must always begin with the symbol S, and then we can keep rewriting it using these rules. So S can be rewritten using, there's only one rule for S. So I can rewrite this as NP followed by VP. And this NP can be rewritten using this rule. Actually, this stands for 2 different rules. One rule says NP goes to noun and another says NP goes to AP followed by noun. So I can choose this to write this NP by, let's say, AP followed by noun, right? So each such going from one node to the next level in the tree corresponds to applying one production rule or one step of derivation. Okay, so that is the structure of this production rules, and there is a start symbol. And this kind of thing is widely used to define artificial languages and their processing. See, once we get the parse tree of my expression, I can start evaluating the expression. I start bottom up. I know that first I have these 2 values, 2 and 4, and I have the operator multiply. So I can obtain the value corresponding to this subtree, which will be 2 multiplied by 4. So let me write that in green. And I can process this by saying that the value of this subtree is 8. Similarly, the value of this subtree is 3. And then I have to do plus of this 8 and 3 because plus is the operator at this level, right? So given the values of the subtrees and the operator, we can evaluate the value of an expression. And so we can go, bottom up and define 3 plus 8 will give us 11. So once we have this phase structure, we can actually translate, we can compute the values of these expressions or do something with it. I can even give you another example. Let me page after. Suppose we were writing a compiler and we are generating code for a program. So suppose my program happens to have the following structure. It is of the form, there is an if there is a statement STMT, right? And this statement that I have first consists of the word if followed by something called BXB, Boolean expression, then a word called then I've got a statement, and then I have got else, and then I have got STMT. So my program actually consists of, at the top, an if type of statement, which consists of 2 substatements, STMC. And this Boolean expression will be passed using rules of Boolean expressions. This statement will recursively pass into some other statements. Maybe it consists of a sequence of assignments. This consists of a while loop, something like this, right? But if I were to generate code for such a program, what I can do is, suppose I have the ability to generate code for this Boolean expression, which I will call as B, and this statement will be S1 and this statement will be S2. Recursively, I assume that I can generate code, machine language code for these 3 statements. Then I can, generate the code for this larger statement, which is an if statement. And it will look like this, it will consist of the code for B that I have generated, recursively. Then I will have a, jump on 0 machine language instruction, and I'll go to a label called L1, right? And then I will have code for S2 followed by jump to L2. Let me go down a little. I need a little bit of space. And then what you will have is code for S1. And then you will have label L2 following it. So L2 comes after it. Okay. So this is the structure. And so what I do is, given such a tree, I know that at the top I have an if statement. So I will start looking at this component of the if Boolean expression. I'll first generate code for that. Then I'll put this jump with label L1, where I have to insert the label L1 somewhere. So this is L1. Sorry, this position is L1. So, if Boolean expression evaluates to 0, which means my condition is true, then I should execute S1. So I will jump to L1 and start executing L1. And at the and then after that I will end in L2. The L2 is where my statement ends. So you can see, you can recursively, given the parse tree, you can recursively compute the task that you want to do on this thing. Such kind of processing of languages like programs or English sentences or expressions is called syntax directed processing, right? Processing. That is, you first find out the syntactic structure of your expression or your sentence, and then you process it based on the syntax step by step. And this is what all modern day compilers use, modern day programming languages use. So this is a very, very important and far reaching idea, which has had very large impact. Now we get ready-made tools so that we don't have to build such processors ourselves, but computer scientists do. And you are, you as computer science minor students, maybe you will be building such things. Okay, so is the idea clear? I've taken a lot of time motivating this, but we are going to define systems like this, where there will be non-terminals or syntactic categories. There will be terminal symbols like left bracket 3, this. In case of English language, the terminals will be English words, right? And my non-terminals will be categories like noun phrase, verb phrase, etc. And then I will have a set of rules, called derivation rules, which look like this. On the left hand side is a syntactic category, and on the right hand side is a string, a sequence consisting of some terminals and some non-terminals. This, in a grammar, there can be an arbitrary string, of terminals and non-terminals. And the idea is that wherever we encounter this left-hand side syntactic category, we can rewrite it as this, as the right-hand side. So you can think of these arrows as rewriting rules. Left-hand side symbol can be non-terminal symbol, can be rewritten by the right-hand side string, which consists of some non-terminals and terminals, right? So we'll see this very more systematically. So let me formalize the notion of grammar, and this definition was given by Chomsky. So he defined a class of grammars called context-free grammars, or CFGs. So you should remember this abbreviation, CFGs. And a context-free grammar consists of 4 things, which I showed you on the previous slide. N, the finite set of non-terminal symbols like E in case of expressions, or in case of English language, NP, VP, etc. Finite set of non-terminal symbols, a finite set of terminal symbols, right? A start symbol, and a set of rules, a set of productions. So a production is a finite collection of elements from this. So each production, comes from this set, N cross N union sigma star. Now, if that confuses you, well, each production, P is a finite set of things which look like this. It consists of tuples because this is a cross product. There is a non-terminal, which we call A, and then there is a string called alpha, the right-hand side of the arrow, right? So it is a pair A and alpha, where alpha is an arbitrary sequence of N union sigma, right? So it can consist a string over non-terminals and terminals. See, what we used to call symbols of alphabet are also called terminals in case of grammars. Interchangeably, these 2 words are used, right? So, each production is a pair like this, but for convenience, we write it like this. So this A tuple A alpha is actually written as A goes to alpha. It is the same thing. This is a different way of writing this. And so basically this non-terminal A goes to this string alpha. And what are these strings alpha like? Here we had an example. Non-terminal E goes to this string left bracket followed by non-terminal symbol E followed by plus followed by E. And this E we rewrote at this first step of derivation as this sequence. Now this E we went and rewrote as 3, right? That is given by this rule. E goes to digit. So basically we have this syntactic structure for grammar, right? There is one more abbreviation we do. Suppose we have got 3 rules for A, right? So let me again write it in red. Suppose we have got rules of the form A goes to alpha 1, we have got A goes to alpha 2, A goes to alpha 3. Then whenever we encounter A in our sentential form, we can rewrite it non-deterministically by alpha 1 or by alpha 2 or by alpha 3. The choice is on us when we do the rewriting. So, for convenience, instead of writing 3 rules, we'll write it in an abbreviated form saying A goes to either alpha 1 or alpha 2 or alpha 3. Okay, so we'll abbreviate these 3 rules into a single rule form which looks like this. This is just for convenience, right? So you've seen what are rules of the grammar and what is a grammar. Basically that defines what is a grammar. So here is an example of a grammar. I have a grammar G which consists of a single set of non-terminal contains a single category called S. So I have a single non-terminal called S, which is also the start symbol. I have 2 terminals or 2 symbols in the alphabet A and B. And my set of productions is given in blue here. So I've got 2 productions here. A goes to either ASB or S goes to epsilon, which I write in a single line like this. So is the definition of this grammar clear to you? Any questions here? I think this is a good time to take questions. Okay, sorry. So this is an example of a grammar. And this grammar has 4 components: the set of non-terminals, which is S, set of terminals, which is AB, set of production rules, P, which is given in blue, and the set of the start symbol from the set of symbols. Here we have only 1 symbol, so there is no choice, right? This is it. So this is the structure of, this is formally a context-free grammar, and every context-free grammar will be given like this by this 4 tuple, where P will be a set of rules like this. So I think you will have to read grammars and give me some languages corresponding to it, or you will have to design grammars for some languages. So pay attention. It's not difficult, but you should get used to this. Now, given a grammar like this, we can derive sentences out of it. We can, of course, we drew it as parse tree, but there is an alternative notation called derivations. And so what we can do is something like this. We can start with. So I will give you an example of a derivation. So we always start with the start symbol S, and then we say that in one step of derivation, actually we write the suffix G here because we are doing this derivation under this given grammar G. So that is given by writing this subscript G. This S can, now I can rewrite it as, there are 2 possibilities. I can rewrite it as ASB or epsilon, and the choice is mine. Depending on the choice I make, I will get different strings at the end. So I choose to write it as SAB, right? Because that is one of the allowed rules. This S can be substituted by the right hand side, and I get this. And then again in one step of derivation, this sentential form, such a combination of sequence consisting of terminals and non-terminals is called a sentential form. Right? So in a grammar, we have a non-terminal going to a sentential form gamma. So this ASB, this is a sentential form. Now within that I pick up one non-terminal. There may be many non-terminals in a sentential form. I arbitrarily pick up one, this S, and I decide to expand that S. So I have 2 rules. I have got S, ASB or epsilon. Again I choose ASB. So this S is replaced by ASB. And so I get the string AASBB. Did you see that? And then I do one more step of derivation. This time I choose to replace this S by epsilon. So what I get is AA epsilon BB. Of course, epsilon is the empty string. So this is actually equal to AABEB, right? So by this 3-step derivation, I got this string AABE out of this grammar. So grammar is a generative mechanism under which we can do derivations which will give us strings, or they are also called sentences. In case of grammar, words are called sentences. Okay, so we can derive sentences which are sequence of symbols only from the alphabet sigma. At the end, we need a pure sequence coming from sigma star, right? In between, we will have sequences consisting of n union sigma star. So we will have sentential forms in between, but at the end we will have sentences, and this is called a derivation. This is a 3-step derivation. So is the idea clear? Any confusion?
Sir, I have two questions.
Yes.
Um,
Oh,
can
sorry.
you
Yeah.
bring that? Yes. So in this derivation of a sequence that you've written,
Yeah.
like why are the terminals always A on the left and B on the right? It can be A S A, right?
It can be. It can be. We will see other example. It is just this example. This grammar had that structure, but that need not be the case. You could have had a grammar which said I have A S, huh?
Okay, so the
B S.
grammar is defined like that. Fine.
Yeah. If I could have a rule like this. In fact, we will see a grammar which looks like this. You know, or AB, huh? Or BA, or epsilon. So you can see what this is doing.
Okay, so this is the rule that is specified, which all the
Right.
sentences
So
that we are looking
product,
at follow.
each step of derivation must follow one rule. Okay.
Yes.
And that rule must come from one of the productions in the grammar. So let me formalize what you are saying. You are right to ask, you just talked in general. I mean, so basically, first understand what is a sentential form. We will denote sentential forms by alpha, beta, gamma. So all the things here, like, underlined here, this is a sentential form. This is a sentential form. This is a sentence, which is also a sentential form, but it is a very specific type of sentential form. This is a sentence, right? So sentential form is just a word in this over n union sigma, right? Non-terminals, we will use symbols, capital letters to denote non-terminals, and we will use small letters to denote symbols of the alphabet sigma, right? So this convention we will follow. So wherever I am using capital letter, assume that is a non-terminal, and whenever I am using small letter, it comes from this alphabet sigma or set of terminal sigma. Okay, and a sentential form will be denoted by Greek letters alpha, beta, gamma. This is the convention we will follow. What is one-step derivation under some grammar G? Well, a sentential form, alpha goes to a sentential form beta by one step of derivation in a grammar G, provided the following happens. Alpha can be broken into three parts. There is some initial part alpha 1, then there is the letter A, and then there is alpha 2. This is, so we break up this alpha into three parts, a preceding part, a non-terminal, and alpha 2. There may be many different ways of breaking it, but for one such way of breaking alpha, and if there is a production rule which says alpha can be rewritten as gamma within my set of productions of my grammar G, then I rewrite in this string, I replace A by gamma. So I get beta as alpha 1 gamma alpha 2. Okay. So this is one step of derivation. That is, in the sentential form, pick up a non-terminal and replace that non-terminal by the right-hand side of the one of the productions for that non-terminal. Right? So this process is highly non-deterministic. And alpha, same alpha can go to many different betas depending on which rules you apply or at which non-terminal you apply this one-step derivation. Right? But this is one step of derivation. And this is what happened here. I had S, and I chose to apply this first alternative in expanding S. I could also have done, say, S in one step goes to epsilon. I could have sent by using the second one, and then I would get this sentence epsilon. The empty word can be derived under this grammar, right? So here we say that A, B, B can be derived from S under this grammar. Epsilon could also have been derived. So there are two things possible from S. Either you can go in one state to this, or you can go to ASB, right? So there are many possible ways of doing one-step derivation from a symbol or from a sentential form, but each one gives you one step of derivation. So is one step of derivation clear? Right? So this is a highly non-deterministic process. Yeah.
Yeah, it's slightly unrelated, but the grammar that you described on the previous slide, does it somehow represent A raised to n, B raised to n?
Which one? This one?
Yes.
Okay. So wait till end of the slide. You are right. Let's wait till the end of the slide. You are right. Right? So that is the okay. So we define what is one-step derivation. Now we can define what is n-step derivations. That is, because here we had a string which came out with n steps. So what is n-step derivation? Well, In zero step derivation, the string does not come because you are doing zero rewrites. Alpha can be, beta can be derived from alpha in n+1 steps, provided there exists some gamma such that from alpha in n steps we can go to gamma, and from gamma in one step we can go to beta. So the total number of steps becomes n+1, right? So this is a very simple definition. So we can define how we can go from alpha to some beta in n steps, right? And non-deterministically, you can go from alpha to beta in say 3 steps or 4 steps or 5 steps. There are maybe many possible derivations for going from alpha to beta, but this just says that it is possible to go from alpha to beta in n steps. That definition is here, right? So here we had a 3-step derivation going from S to AABB. Agree? Or we had a 2-step derivation going from S to AASBB. Okay? So idea of 2-step derivation should be clear. And finally, we say that string beta is derivable from alpha if for using some arbitrary n, you know, finite but arbitrarily large from alpha. Oh, this should be beta. I'm so sorry. There is a mistake here. This should be beta. Okay. From alpha in n steps, you can go to beta, right? You don't care how many steps you took. You should be able to do it by a finite sequence of rewrites. Then we say that beta is derivable from alpha. Is the notion of derivable clear to you? Right? And what we are really interested in.
The last part, derivable.
Pardon?
Can you repeat one more time? Derivable.
Right. So, you know, given a grammar, you know, like this, we are asking whether, you know, S derives AASBB in 2 steps, right? It is derivable in 2 steps. So I can write this as, you know, in the notation of the next page. If I use this red, I can say that S in 2 steps, you know, under this grammar G derives AASBB, right? This is clear? Because here I exhibit a derivation sequence of length 2, which will start with S and end with AASBB, right? Now, I ask a more general question. Suppose I am given AAABBB. Is there a derivation sequence which will lead from S to AABBB? That is this sentential form derivable from S, you know, in some arbitrary number of steps. So I don't care how many steps it will take. Is this derivable? So in this grammar, do you think AABBB is derivable? So it was Parth who asked, no? Parth?
Yes.
Is this string derivable?
Yes.
How can we do that? So here we will make a change. After some step, right?
We can get it. That's right.
Yes. So after 2 steps, you are in this sentential form, and then I do 1 step to actually get AAASBBB, right? I could have given a different. I don't branch off this way, but I go this way, right? And then I apply the epsilon rule, replacing this S by epsilon to get AABBB, right? So this string is derivable, right? From S. I exhibited a 4-step derivation for this string, but I don't care how many steps I took. So I just want to define that some beta is derivable from alpha. That is, if there exists an n such that alpha can be rewritten to beta using some n steps, I don't care what that n is, then I say that beta is derivable from alpha, right? So in our example, we would have said that S is AAABBB is derivable from S in some finite number of steps. That is what we would say. There is of course this subscript D. By the way, when the grammar is fixed, we will not always write this subscript. It will be assumed. Okay. So is the idea of one string being derivable from another clear? We are kind of saying that. Yeah. Hello.
Yes, sir. It's clear.
And so to show derivability, of course, you will have to show a derivation, which will take some number of steps. But here we are saying just the abstract property of being derivable. And then we will talk about, we are interested in specifically derivations like this, which start with the start symbol and end up with a sequence of terminals or the sequence from sigma. So we get a pure sentence out of the derivation, right? we can say that this sentence is derivable in the grammar, because in the grammar you must always begin with S. So what are the sentences which are derivable in the grammar? They are denoted as this: all x's such that S goes to X in some arbitrary number of steps. We collect all such x's and call that the language of the grammar. So is the notion of language of the grammar clear? These are all the sentences or terminal strings which are derivable from S in some arbitrary number of steps. This is the notion of language of the grammar. And we come back to what Parth said. Here we had a grammar. And what do you think is the language of this grammar? So I think I asked that somewhere. Okay, this was the example that we had, right? This was the grammar we had. So what is the language of this grammar? Language of the grammar is all strings over, in this case, our terminals are AB. So all strings over AB, which can be derived using rules of this grammar. What do you think can be derived? So I think Arvind already had the answer. We saw that we can derive. Can we derive epsilon from this grammar?
Yes.
So certainly, if we talk about L of G1, it will contain epsilon. Will it contain AB?
Yes.
Because we first write S as SASB, and this S we erase using this epsilon rule, right? So rules which take a non-terminal to epsilon are called epsilon rules, right? So we can get AB. What about AA?
No.
No, so this we will not include. What about AABB?
Yes.
Okay, so and also AABBB, right? So now you can see what is the kind of language that this grammar will generate. So this LG is called the language generated by this grammar. What is the language? Anybody? So Arvind?
So it's A per n times B per n, where n is greater than or equal to 0.
Right. So it is basically generates this language A to the power B to the power n, right? This is what we claim. Now, of course, the claim is fine, but how do we prove that this is the case? Sometimes the grammar will get complicated, and then, you will have some target language like this in mind, and you will be asked to write a grammar for this. So you will come up with this grammar, and somehow, there is confusion. Is this grammar really giving this language or not? So you got to either given a grammar, we may have to find its language, or given a language, we will have to find a grammar. These are the kind of exam questions you're going to get. Okay. And in fact, that is the whole idea, no? For valid C language programs, what is the grammar? It will admit exactly syntactically correct C programs and eliminate every C program with some mistake in it, C mistake in it, some grammar mistake in it, right? So this is a very, 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 computer scientists spend a lot of time, coming up with grammars for languages of interest. So, all valid HTML pages, we want a grammar for that, or valid XML documents, we'll have a grammar for what is a valid XML document, and the grammar for that document will be defined by what is called its DTD. Okay, so these are very widely used ideas, but the claim is that this grammar generates this language. How do we prove it? That is the question. Okay, so we'll have to give a proof. So first thing is, so I will try to give you, you have to basically prove that every sentence which is generated by this grammar will be of the form A raised to n, B raised to n. This is the first thing that we will prove. So, this equality, we will first prove that the language of this grammar is a subset of A raised to n, B raised to n. That is, everything generated by this grammar is, so first we will prove this equality in one direction. We'll show that everything generated by the grammar is of the form A raised to n, B raised to n. We will do this by induction on number of steps of derivations. Every step, number of steps of derivations, right? So how can we show that? So suppose we choose n equal to 0, right? Number of steps of derivation. It will not give us any string. S will just remain with 0, right? Okay, S in 0 steps will only go to S, and there is nothing to prove, right? The no element of language can arise in S. Suppose we take n equal to 1. Okay, now what are the kind of derivations possible from S? Either you can go to ASB or you can go to epsilon. So only one string arises, epsilon, and this epsilon is of the form a raised to n, b raised to n, right? So for n equal to 1, this works. Now in the induction step, so this is my base step. Now in my induction step, I assume that in n steps of derivations, if I get an x, then x belongs to a raised to n, b raised to n. Okay. So any string which is derivable in n steps, I assume this. So this is my assumption. Now I consider a string which is derived by n plus 1 steps. How can I do an n plus 1 step derivation? Well, from S, as a first step, I will do A S A, and then I will do some n step derivation to get some string y, right? Now, what is this string y like? In context-free grammar, if you do an n step derivation from this sentential from, ASB, my mistake, ASB, right? If I do a derivation like this, your y will necessarily be of the form AXB, because this A and B must remain, they cannot be further rewritten. And this middle S was rewritten to X, right? And this rewriting of S to X, this is the property of context freeness, that the way I rewrite from S to Y does not depend on the fact that what was A was in the left and B was right. I mean, I can freely transform this S into some string X, and the corresponding Y will be generated. So this basically will consist of an n step derivation of string S to X, and that same derivation will be repeated here with an A to the left and a B to the Y. Now this X already has this property that it belongs to A raised to n, B raised to n, and Y is of the form AXB, right? And X has that property. So Y will also have that property because Y belongs to A raised to n plus 1, B raised to n plus 1, right? Which belongs to this language. So if you do one more step of this rule, you will maintain that property of being inside A n plus 1. And if you use this rule, epsilon, of course, you are maintaining that property. So all possible ways of deriving this property keep you within this language. If you start with a string, which is derivable using S, which is in this language, then we can do this. So this is one half of the proof. You can read in detail in Cosen also. What is the other half? So I will add the other half. In other half, we have to show that this way. That is, every string, if X belongs to A raised to n, B raised to n, then S will derive X in some arbitrary number of steps. I'm omitting G subscript because our grammar is fixed. So every string of the form A raised to n, B raised to n can be derived. How do we prove it? By induction on n. And the argument is very simple. If n is 0, epsilon can be derived. If n is equal to m plus 1, by induction we assume that A raised to m, B raised to m. So induction step, n is equal to, let's say, m plus 1. And we assume that the property holds for m. So A raised to m, B raised to m is derivable. That is right, derivable. This we can assume. What do we have to show? A raised to n, B raised to m. That is A raised to m plus 1, B raised to m plus 1 is also derivable. This is what to show. How can we show that? See, in applying induction step, we assume that A raised to m, B raised to m is derivable, and we have to show that A raised to m plus 1, B raised to 1, m is derivable. So how can we do that? Ishan?
We can write this as A raised to m, B raised to m times B.
No, S first goes to what?
S goes to A raised to m, B raised to m.
Oh, in n steps.
Yeah, in some instance.
S goes to
A
A
raised to M, A
B
raised to
raised to
M,
M.
S. Yeah,
This is there. This is given to us. Now we have to
yeah.
prove that A raised to M plus 1, B raised to M plus 1 is derivable. This is by assumption.
Yeah.
Now,
So now I can take one step derivation to give me
yeah,
S going to ASB.
ASB, right?
Yeah.
And then I
And
just
then,
rewrite this as using
yeah,
this derivation. I just do it inside the surrounding A and B, right? So it's clear that by this derivation, which we will call as D, we can n-step derivation. By mimicking D, you will get A followed by A raised to M, B raised to M. You know, this S gets replaced by A raised to M, B raised to M in n steps. And then the outside A and B remain as they are, right? Because in context-free grammar, if this non-terminal goes to some string, then this sentential form goes to, you know, that S replaced by that string, right? This is the key property of context-free grammar. So here is a m plus 1 step derivation for this string A raised to M plus 1, B raised to M. So we have finished the proof, right? So given a grammar and a language, you should be able to check that, you know, the language of the grammar is this. You have to be able to do proofs like this. Okay, I will not ask you to do too many of these proofs, but basically sometimes it is required to do this because grammars get complicated and you need to give a justification that it's deriving the right language. Okay, we'll do little more practice. Here is another grammar G2, you know, which has this 5 rules. S goes to ASA, or it can go to BSB, or it can just go to A, or it can just go to B, or it can go to epsilon. So my question to you is, let us try to get some strings which belong to this language, and then let us try to answer what is the language of this grammar. By the way, when I give a grammar, I should specify what is the set of non-terminals, what is the set of terminals, what is the start symbol. But by convention, the start symbol will be named S if it is not, unless it's stated otherwise. And from this rules, I can already derive that my grammar has only one non-terminal, capital S. And I have two terminals, A and B, small a and small b, right? So I don't have to give those 4 tuple n sigma ps. Just this listing of these rules indicates what the grammar is, right? So we will be using that convention. Okay, so here is my grammar G2. Now what is the language of this grammar? So for that, let us try to derive some strings within this. So we have Rani here. Rani, hi, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So let's try to derive some string out of this. So we start with S and then choose one of the rules. No, it doesn't matter. ASA. Sorry, I think some problem with your audio. But let's say we rewrite it as S goes to A. Oh, sorry, ASA. You can do one more step of derivation where we substitute this inner S by something, one of those 5 things possible. So let's choose to write it as BSP. What will I get? This A and A remain, and this S gets written as BSP, right? You saw, I will underline it in blue. This S got rewritten as BSP, and this outside. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Is making. So do you agree that this is a 2-step derivation giving us this sentential form, Rani? Yeah, I think your audio was bad. Okay, so excuse you because we are not able to hear you. So let's ask Pooja. Pooja, suppose I replace this S by epsilon, what will I get? Pooja's there? No. Okay. I think what I will do is, where is the, no, we'll continue. So I choose to rewrite this S in this sentential form by epsilon because that is allowed. Then I'll get string ABBA, right? So ABBA certainly belongs to the language of this grammar. What about BAAB? Does B, A, B belong to this language? So, Sujit, are you there? Hi, Sujit. Not able to reach Sujit. What about Vishal? Vishal? See, this kind of
Hello.
practice. Hi, Vishal. So, is BAAB in the language of this grammar?
Yes.
How will we do that?
In the first step, we will go BSB.
Very good. BSB. And then?
Next step, we will replace S by ASA.
Yeah. So, we'll get BSASAB, right?
Yeah, and then the next one we will replace S by epsilon.
Yeah, so we'll get BAAB. So now from these two examples, can you guess what is the kind of strings you will get? Every time by this rule, you will surround whatever has been derived so far by an outside A, starting A and an ending A, or you will expand it by a starting B and an ending B. Right?
Yes.
So what will you get? Or you can just replace it by a single A or a single B or an epsilon. Okay, of course, I'll have string over AB star such that reverse of X is equal to X. So if you reverse BAAB, you will get back BAAB. These such strings are called palindromes, right? Strings such that reversing the string gives you back the same string, right? That is because whatever string is there, if that is the property true for this inner S, then if you surround it by, if thing inside S can be reversed, if you surround it by two A's, one at the start and one, you will still get a reversible string. Or if you surround it by B, you will still get a reversible. And A by itself is reversible to itself. B by itself is reversible to itself. So language of this grammar G1 is all strings over AB such that reverse of X is same as X, right? So these are called palindromes. Okay. And you have actually got to prove that all palindromes can be derived using this grammar, and everything you derive using this grammar is a palindrome. So the two things are equal. You have to give arguments like I gave before. Okay. But are you intuitively able to see that this derives all the palindromes? See, because in the base step, with a single step of derivation, you can either get an A or B or an epsilon. All three of these words are palindromes. Their reverse is same as itself. Now suppose in an n step derivation, you go from S, you derive some X, right? You n step derivation. You assume that this X is a palindrome. X is palindrome, right? Given this. Now you, in n+1 step, you derive a string. How do you do it? You take this, you first apply this rule or this rule, because that is how you can expand the string. You surround whatever this X was derivable by either an A or a B, right? So recursively you take this step first, and then you mimic this derivation to get a longer string. And you can see that, the resulting string will be derivable. So in some sense, this property of being reversible is invariant across applying this production. If it holds for this inner S, then it holds for the derived term SAS, right? And you can also show that any reversible string can be derived using this grammar. So I leave that to you as an exercise. Okay, this was any question about this language and this grammar? So you see, grammars can define these reversible strings. By the way, this language of strings over AB which are reversible, is it a regular language?
No.
No, because somehow, intuitively the first half and the second half have to look the same, right? Have to be mirror images of each other, right? So you have to remember a lot from the first half, right? That is the intuition. And to formalize that, we'll play this game with Daemon. Daemon chooses some n, then we'll use the first half, which is much longer than n. Daemon won't be able to remember it, and so he will say it can be pumped, but if you pump it, you are not going to get something which is the mirror image of the second half. So, this is not a regular language, right? So you see, this grammar is able to derive languages which are not even regular, and they are very useful. Okay. So one more last language, an example. We had these expressions, no, fully parenthesized expressions. Remember this very first example that we did, right? So if you ignore all the letters and the symbols, if you keep only the brackets in this, we get expressions which are fully parenthesized. Somehow within this expression, the brackets have to match, right? We always try to check that in the expression the brackets match. What is this property of brackets matching? We are trying to just define that property. So let's define a language only over two symbols. What are the symbols that we have? Our alphabet sigma consists of only two symbols, a left square bracket and a right square bracket. And we want to construct strings over this such that we say that the string has matching brackets, right? So matching bracket strings constructed out of these two brackets would be something like this. Would this be matching bracket? So I don't know if Vishal, is this a well parenthesized string where are the brackets matching here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What about this?
Yes.
So what about this string here? In blue?
The blue one?
At the top line?
No.
Why not? There is a left bracket followed by left bracket followed by right bracket followed by right bracket followed by left bracket followed by right bracket.
Yes, it is.
It is. I mean, we are intuitively used to it. But is this red string balanced parenthesis language?
No, because first left, then right, and then again right.
So at this point, somehow the right brackets exceeded left brackets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, although the total number of left and right brackets are equal, which should be the case, somewhere, as you go from left to right, somewhere you close the brackets much earlier than opening them, right? So this is not in the language, and the language of such balanced parenthesis strings is called paren. This is the name we have given it. So it's a language over these two symbols, right bracket and left bracket, and the rules which say that which string over this left bracket right bracket is inside paren. Firstly, for the whole string x, if you count the number of left brackets, so this term here counts the number of left brackets in the string x. So how much is the count of left bracket in this blue string? So let me ask somebody else. Uday?
Yes,
are you
sir.
there? How many?
Yes.
What is the count of left brackets in the blue string above in the first line?
3.
3. What is the count of right brackets?
3.
3. Same is the case with the red string, right? So first condition for a string to belong to paren is that the number of left brackets and the right bracket should be equal. That is, at the end, all brackets should be closed, right? Second is, if you take any prefix of this string y, that is, if you consider the initial part of any initial part of this string, you have the idea of prefix is clear to you, right? Then the number of left brackets should be greater than equal to the number of right brackets. That is, there can be some still open left brackets which are not closed, but there cannot be extra right brackets, right? So any string having these two strings will be called balanced, and paren is the language of such balanced strings, right? Clear? Any question? Okay. And I mean, if you are going to define any language, mathematical language which is to be processed by Mathematica or C or Java or anything that deals with parentheses, you would want to ensure that the parentheses are matched, that parentheses are balanced. So it is very important that you are able to determine this property and to generate all such languages. So what we are going to do is try to give a grammar which will generate such strings. Any suggestion how to construct such a grammar?
So for the second point, the count of, it should be count of y, right?
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. Oh, yes. Yeah. Arvind, thank you for pointing it out. Absolutely. Absolutely. It should be y. My mistake. In x, of course, they should become equal. But in any prefix y, it should be, the left bracket should be in excess of the right brackets, right? Or equal. Okay. Now, what is the grammar which will generate exactly this kind of balanced strings? So, any idea? Of course, epsilon is balanced, right? That's clear. Yeah. Left bracket, right bracket by itself is balanced, right? So this string can be generated from S. That is not a problem. What about left bracket S, right bracket? Can I put such a rule? Parth? This rule will be okay if we generate balanced string word. We can expand it by putting a left bracket outside and a right bracket, and it will remain balanced, right? Do you agree? In fact, then I don't need this rule because that follows from this rule. So I can do with this rule, right? So I will rewrite this. So I can say that I can have a rule like this. But that does not give me all the strings. In particular, it will not give me this string, right? So I need another rule which says if I have a balanced bracket string and another balanced bracket string, I can put one after the other and I'll still get a balanced bracket string. So this is the kind of, I've designed this grammar like this. And how can I generate this string out of this grammar? So Ishan, you want to tell me how to generate this blue string out of this grammar?
We can, I think it will have to be in two steps. So first we can generate the left balance.
Two S's, right?
Yeah.
The first half and the second half, right?
Yeah, and then we can individually generate
and
each
the
half.
first half has the structure. There is an opening parenthesis, then a substring and a closing parenthesis, right?
Yeah.
So we can write this as this first S. We can write as left bracket S, right bracket, and the second S remains as it is.
Yeah.
So this is all one step, huh? And then what can we do? We can write this S by
again as bracket S bracket.
So this bracket S bracket S. This is a very painful way of deriving, but this is how a computer would do it, huh? Followed by S afterwards, right? And that in one step, we can erase this. I mean, we can now begin on this S if we like, leaving this S as it is. We can deal with it later. So if you always try to replace the leftmost non-terminal, it is called the leftmost derivation, huh? So if you are replacing only the leftmost non-terminal, it doesn't matter. You can do it in any order. It will not affect the derivation. But we are not going to do the leftmost derivation. We are going to now work on this S which is not the leftmost. So I will leave this string as it is. And this S I will derive as left bracket S right bracket, right? This S I have rewritten as this. Okay. And then this S I'm going to write as epsilon. So what will I get? I'll get double bracket S, and then I'll get this. Correct? Because this S I erased using this silent production going to epsilon. Now I will erase this S also. So all these are one step, huh? And then I'll get left bracket. This will go to epsilon. So I'll get right bracket, left bracket, right bracket. So I hope you are able to see how to derive such a string, right? Okay.
Sir, sorry, but I am not able to understand what the second point meant. Could you repeat that part from there
This second
once?
property?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that. Page after. Good question. I think it is. So our string is this. Is this a balanced parenthesis string? Is this a balanced parenthesis string? Are the number of left bracket and right bracket matching? Hello? I think we lost. Who was it that asked the question? Sorry, I missed you. No. I think we'll work this out together. Who was it that asked this question, please? Was it Abir or? I think.
Yes, sir, it was me.
Yeah, okay, Abir. So is this a balanced parenthesis string? Are all the left brackets matching the right brackets?
Yes, sir.
So this is a good string, right? It belongs to parent. Right? Now I give you another string.
Yes, sir.
I give you another string. Does this belong to parent?
No, sir.
Why not? What went wrong?
Sir, there is an it's not symmetric. The number of left and right is not equal on initial sides.
Where is it not? No, the total number of lefts and rights is equal.
The total number is equal, but like
right. So that is the first property, right? That the total number should be equal. And the second property is consider some initial part of the string. This is the prefix y of this x. Right? If you consider any prefix y of this x, then in that prefix there can be excess left brackets, but there should not be excess right brackets, right?
Okay, understood.
Yeah, so there are two right brackets and one left bracket, and there is an unmatched right bracket. And this property that there can be excess left brackets but not excess right brackets is what is written here, right? Number of left brackets in y must be greater than, yeah. So good. I mean, I think I like the fact that you are asking this question. Okay. So that is our language parent. And here I have a grammar which generates that language parent, I claim. So we derive this string from that. But that is not the proof. You know, I gave some grammar and I claim anything, right? So here is the grammar that same grammar given here. And the claim is that this parent language is generated by this grammar. That is all, you know, terminal strings derivable from S in this grammar are exactly give you the set of balanced parenthesis language. How do we prove this? So this requires proof, right? It is not obvious. Maybe we made a mistake somewhere. So again, this has to be proved in two steps. First, we have to show that every string which is generated by the grammar, you know, is well balanced. So first we have to prove this side containment. That is, everything generated by the grammar is, grammar can only generate balanced strings. How do we do this? We do it by structural induction on this production rules, you know. So what are the basic, you know, what is the base? So by induction on structure of grammar rules, I'm going to, you know, give a slight shortcut to what we did. We did it on number of, you know, steps of derivation, but I'm going to do induction on the structure of the grammar rules, right? And what does that mean? Take all the rules from S, which will give me, you know, a string, you know, in a single step of derivation. So my base step will be what? I can go to S goes to epsilon. That's the only thing in a single step will give me a terminal string, right? And this is well balanced, right? Epsilon is well balanced. So this is true. Now I do induction step. That is, I assume that if S derives X, then X is okay. So I think it's best to do it by induction on the number of derivation. Then X is balanced. So I assume this property. And then I consider all ways of, you know, longer derivation sequences of length n plus 1. So I could have a derivation sequence which could be of the form S goes to, I can apply either this rule or this rule. So suppose I choose to apply this rule, right? Now I get two S's. This is one step. Now this S will be reduced to some Y. This S will go to some Y, and this S will go to some Z, right? And do you agree that this first S will go to some string Y, and some this S, second S will go to some string Z? I think I should write it better. Now we have these two S's. Suppose the first S in some number of steps goes to string Y. Clearly, you know, we are talking about an n+1 step derivation, and first step is already SS. So the derivations that happen for rewriting the first S will be less than n, right? So this will happen in some m steps, you know, where m is less than equal to n, right? Because, and the second S, I will for convenience call this S1 and S2. This S1 and S2 are not there. This is just for your this thing. And S2 in some L steps will go to Z, where L is also less than equal to n, right? That is the only way in which you know, you will get a string. So then using m plus L steps, mimicking those, we will get the string Y, right? This is how we get a string in n, and m plus L should add up to n. So you see how we are getting an n+1 step derivation. You know, we can first apply this rule. That is the case we are considering, case 1, where in the first step we apply the rule S goes to SS, and then we do an n-step derivation to Y. Now this n-step derivation of Y will involve first rewriting this S1 in some m steps to Y, and in the remaining n minus m step we will rewrite the second S2 to Z, right? So now by induction hypothesis, this Y will be balanced, because we have assumed that anything which is done in n or less steps, you know, is balanced. By induction hypothesis, we can assume that if we derive a string in n or less steps, it will be balanced. So Y is balanced, Z is balanced, right? Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. This goes to some string W. Okay, so we are assuming Y is balanced, Z is balanced. So, and this W is equal to YZ. YZ is what you derive here, right? Since Y is balanced and Z is balanced, YZ is also balanced. So if we take first step as SS, then we know that whatever we derive will be balanced. Similarly, we consider other case where S goes to left bracket, S right bracket, and then in, you know, in one step, and then in some n steps you will get a string which will look like left bracket, some Y, and some right bracket, right? This S will be written to this Y. Now we know that this derivation of S to Y happens in n steps, and so this Y is balanced. But if this Y is balanced, the larger string left bracket Y right bracket is also balanced. So again, by taking this, by applying this rule, S goes to left bracket, S right bracket, and doing rest of the production, we will maintain the property of being balanced. So we'll only get balanced substrings, you know, by applying the rules of the grammar. So you saw the nature of the argument. This is one half of the argument. The other half is a little more tricky. We have to show that every parenthesized string can be derived within our grammar. That is, there is no string which is well balanced which cannot be derived by this grammar. Okay, so how do we show that? So in Sketch, the argument goes like this. You know, we do it by the induction on the length of the string. The string, right? So for strings of length 0, we have only epsilon. So base step epsilon. Epsilon is derivable, right? Because epsilon is well balanced, string of length 0, we can show that it is derivable. There is a direct rule which will take us to epsilon. S goes to epsilon is one of our rules, you know. So epsilon is derivable. Now in induction step, we show the following. We assume that all strings of length n are derivable, right? And we will show that a string which is larger than n, you know, which is larger than n, you know, is also derivable. So in induction step, we will consider a string of length. Let length of y be equal to n plus 1. Okay. Now this string y can be of one of those following forms. You know, what form can it take? Y is either of the form following. Y equal to, it has an opening bracket, and then you know that bracket closes only at the end, and there is a substring z which is you know, balanced also. So case 1, y is the following form. What is case 2? Y has the following form. There is a prefix of y, you know, which is of the form wz, such that w belongs to parent and z belongs to parent. That is, the string can be broken into two parts, where all the left brackets got closed in the w part, and then you started again with an opening bracket and they got closed into z. So either you have an opening bracket and that closes only at the end of the string, or you can split the string into two parts so that both parts are fully balanced and you have catenated them. These are the only two cases which can arise, right? In both cases, this string z or string wz are shorter than y, and so by induction hypothesis, you know, they are derivable. And if z is derivable, then this larger string y in first case is also derivable. If w and z are derivable, then this in second case, this string y is also derivable. So you can see that, you know, both these cases strings will remain derivable, assuming that z and wz are derivable, which are shorter strings. So this is how you show the other side of the containment. So Cozen gives a whole lecture on proving that balanced parenthesis language is, you know, equal to this, and that particular this theorem Cozen proves in a lecture. So I urge you to read it. With this, I'll finish today's lecture. So what have we done? We have defined context-free grammars. We have defined their languages. We have defined the notion of languages. Sorry, yeah, just 1 minute. We have defined the notion of derivations. We have shown how, you know, from the start symbol terminal strings can be derived in the grammar, and we get the language of the grammar. And the key question is, you know, given a language, we have to define a grammar for it. You know, so given a language like this, parent, we have to define a grammar for it, or given a grammar, we have to figure out what is its language. Okay. This is one kind of question that we can do. Now, this kind of exercise is done very, very frequently. As I said it, every time you define a new programming language, you have to define its grammar. You know, every time you define any artificial language, like language of, you know, HTML documents, you have to define its grammar. Or, you know, valid XML documents, you have to define its grammar. And if you look at this Hofcroft Motwani Ullman book, which is one of the references, there is a whole chapter on application of context-free grammars, which gives grammars for all of these, you know, different languages. Now that is only for your out of interest. You can look at it. You don't have to, you know, you won't be asked any questions about the XML grammar or the HTML grammar or C grammar. But what I'm trying to say is this theory that we have done actually lets us define syntactically valid artificial languages, which are used in computers everywhere. Okay, so that is what we have done. Any questions? Sorry,
in the induction part of this, the last part where we prove
the second half of
parentheses.
Yeah.
Like we know that the strings will have even length, right? So can't we consider the length to be of the form 2n and then induct on 2n plus 2?
But it may not factor with balanced parts in right at the middle. Look at this string x. You know, there is this part which is w, which is of length 4, and this part of length z. Right, which is of length 2. And I cannot split it, although it's of even length. If I split it in the middle, I don't get balanced substrings. So that would not be a very convenient way of doing induction, right? You want to split larger string into smaller strings which are both balanced, right?
Yes, sir. So I'm saying that these same cases will also apply to that case. Like if y has length 2n plus 2 And in the first case, I'm getting Z will have length 2n, and by induction that will work.
Correct. Absolutely.
W and Z will have both even length and they'll be less than equal to 2n. So even that
Yes.
will work.
Correct. The fact that they are even is not very useful in the proof, but it is true. It's a correct property. But even without invoking that property that it is of even length, we can complete this proof, right? We only need to know that W and Z are of smaller length than Y. Similarly, here Z is of smaller length than Y. And so by induction hypothesis, if Z is a balanced string Y will only have one of these two forms. It cannot have any other form. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that is the argument. So study this argument. I've given you the outline. You can look at the argument. It is an advanced part of this course that you have to give a proof that a language is, exactly the language of a grammar, huh? Because that requires giving this proof in two directions. Okay. But at least intuitively, you should be able to check that the language and its grammar match. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll continue next time. Any other question? So if there are no more questions, let me at least